Hi, this is the Democratic Alliance Weekly Labour Report. It's the 8th of September 2023, Friday the 8th of September. Please share this with whoever's interested in our labour situation in South Africa. I'm going to just talk about two issues today, about the many employers who are in breach of various pension fund rules, which is an issue. It's an issue that boils down to bargaining councils. And then I'm going to talk about employment equity again. Now, I know everyone's getting a bit irritated with employment equity, but we need to not only target it, fight it, but we need to actually get rid of it eventually. So thank you for tuning in. It's Michael Bagram, Friday the 8th of September 2023, and this is the Democratic Alliance Labour Report. I'm a DAMP and their Labour spokesperson. So let's talk about the first thing. It's the pension funds. A report has just been made that many employers are reneging on keeping up with the pension funds for their employees. Well, I'll explain why. And it's not a difficult thing to understand. We have a bargaining council system in South Africa where small businesses are forced to join the bargaining councils, which are governed basically by big trade unions and big business. Now, these small businesses are trying to make a living. They're desperately trying to keep their businesses alive. They're trying desperately to see if they can create some employment. Now, we know small businesses are supposed to be the job creation center for the world, and in South Africa in particular. Now, when you force them into a bargaining council, they're being forced to keep the same terms and conditions that big business has agreed with the big trade unions. So you're forcing small business to compete with big business, which obviously suppresses the small businesses. Now, these bargaining councils, funnily enough, as one might expect, put in rules and regulations which are completely impossible for small businesses to keep. They have to put a certain amount of money into pension funds, into medical aids, into all sorts of contributions they have to make to the pension funds, and they're not wanting to be there. They're non-parties. They get forced in by the Minister of Employment and Labour, the genius, and when they're forced in, they have to start making all these deductions, first from the employees that are unhappy that the deductions are being made, and secondly, they have to pay in extra to be part of that bargaining council. So what do? They renege on some of the bargaining council's funds. And we have thousands of businesses. I've just read a report, a very sad report, where small employers are absolutely struggling, and because they're non-parties, because they don't want to be there in the first place, they're actually refusing in a certain set of circumstances to pay some of the contributions. And one can understand that. They can't afford it. In particular, in the clothing industry, which has been decimated by the bargaining council system. Now, the Democratic Alliance will have a careful look at this when we're in government in 2024. We need to go and review that entire bargaining council system so that we can free up small businesses to not only create employment, but also to treat their employees fairly, and also to be able to negotiate with their own employees as to what deductions must be made and how much must be paid. At the moment, they don't have that, and the Democratic Alliance undertakes, on behalf of the small business community, to support that community and to see what can be done. You can imagine what's happening when these small businesses aren't paying. The bargaining councils are litigating. That's extra money for the small businesses who have to start paying litigation costs. And in fact, many of them are dying and falling apart. So it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous system. Right way back in the past in England, we had Maggie Thatcher come in and destroy the bargaining council system, and she freed up small businesses and created millions of extra jobs. The Democratic Alliance will do just that. They'll free up the system, create millions of jobs, and people can decide whether they want to belong to pension funds, medical aids, and whatever other deductions they want. At the moment, there's no freedom at all for small businesses to make that decision. So the bargaining council system has to be reviewed, overhauled, and very carefully checked before we can actually go forward. So that bargaining council system needs a very careful check. And then we've got employment equity. Employment equity, and I've spoken about this for months now, it's a race-based piece of legislation. It's pernicious, it's bad, We know that social engineering the world over has been very destructive. The National Party did that, the Nazis did that. People who start with racial engineering and social engineering are looking for trouble. And we've done just that now in South Africa. We have over 100 pieces of race-based legislation. In fact, I think that some study has been done where there's more race-based legislation in South Africa today than there was under apartheid. I mean, it sounds weird. Now, the Democratic Alliance has undertaken to have a look at all of this. Have a look at the entire legislation suite, especially under the labor law, and I'm happy to help in that exercise and to see how we can actually remove race, remove color from the exercise. Now, you must understand that the minister has now gone out on a road show to try and explain to the minority communities, in particular the colored and Indian communities, as to why they're not worse off now under the new employment equity regulations and the legislation. He can't explain that. What's happening is he's put into place regulations that are very destructive, very divisive, and the Democratic Alliance is taking that to court. We can't tolerate something of that nature. Well, the minister, when asked, why is he making it more harsh? Why is he taking legislation such as the employment equity legislation and making it more harsh for business, making it more harsh for the individuals in South Africa? Why is he doing that? And basically, the minister's admitted that the employment equity legislation hasn't worked for over 20 years. It hasn't worked. It's just made business suppressed. So what is happening is what he did was he decided to make it more harsh. He decided to actually make the regulations more difficult. And he put in regulations that basically tell businesses how many colored, how many Indian, how many white, how many employees they're allowed. I mean, he wants to go in and run the business. They can't even run their own department, the Department of Employment and Labor. They can't run their department. They've made a complete mess of it. Now they want to start running the private sector. And the Democratic Alliance will never countenance that. We are going to court. We're looking at that very carefully. But you must now understand what happened. The minister was challenged by a trade union. That challenge was going to go to court. The minister didn't want to go to court. His legal advisors said he's going to lose. It's counterproductive to litigate. What also happened is obviously he realized that it's against our constitution. The genius Minister of Employment and Labor realized that through his legal advisors, then sat down with the Trade Union Solidarity and said, I'll come to an agreement. Now, he's come to an extrajudicial agreement where they've said, all right, we agree with certain things. But when asked by Dr. Carter in the employment meeting, portfolio meeting, the minister said he's still going to implement and there's no date on when they're going to implement. And also they're not going to remove their regulations. Now the regulations go contrary to the agreement with Solidarity Trade Union. You can't make the story up. It's absolutely ridiculous. He says yes on the one hand and no on the other hand, and you feel like you're in Alice in Wonderland. What the minister really wants to do is he wants to take legislation that doesn't work, make it more difficult, and then say that this is not going to be the answer. He's trying to appease a certain community in South Africa by saying, it doesn't work, but I'll make it work. What he's trying to do is give the legislation horns. And it's ridiculous. For a minister of a government like that, an ANC government, which has messed up everything, they now want to give it more horns. So here we are. This is what the minister looks like today. He looks like a fellow that's sitting there with horns. He can't make up his mind whether it's yes or no, and he can't make up his mind as to whether he needs the regulations or he doesn't need the regulations. In essence, what we're finding today is an ANC government that is struggling to run the country, that is destroying the economy, they've destroyed it already, and desperately trying to look for some measure that might appease people. But what it's done is it's destroyed the ANC's name in the world. It's destroyed their name amongst the colored community, Indian community, white community, you name it, any minority, and in particular with small businesses. So thank you for listening to me. That's Michael Bagram, DAMP, Labour spokesperson, Friday the 8th of September 2023.